All right, good afternoon. As you know, today is World Humanitarian Day, and we're delighted to be joined by Ursula Mueller, the Assistant Secretary General for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Ursula, welcome back, and you have the floor.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Stefan. As the spokesperson said, we mark today the World Humanitarian Day to honor aid workers around the world who often risk their own lives to help save and improve the lives of others. 16 years ago, on August 19, 2003, the Canal Hotel in Baghdad, Iraq, was attacked, killing 22 of our UN colleagues, including a great humanitarian, the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Iraq, Sergio Vieira de Mello. And since then, more than 4,500 aid workers have been killed, injured, detained, assaulted, or kidnapped while carrying out their work. And that is equivalent to 280 humanitarians attacked every year. That is too many of our colleagues and fellow humanitarians killed or injured, and too many making the ultimate sacrifice. As respect for the laws of war weaken around the world, aid workers are increasingly vulnerable when they are more needed than ever before. Last year was the worst for violence against aid workers in 5 years, and the second worst on record overall. In 2018, there were 405 victims with 131 killed, 144 wounded, and 130 kidnapped in 35 crisis-affected countries. So far in 2019, some 156 aid workers have been attacked on the job, with 57 killed, 59 wounded, and 40 kidnapped. But even among these risks, over 500,000 professional humanitarian workers work every day to protect, save, and improve the lives of tens of millions of vulnerable people. Today, on the 10th anniversary of World Humanitarian Day, we are paying special tribute to the women among them. Women make up 40% of the humanitarian workforce throughout the world. They are active in every aspect of humanitarian action, from negotiating access to people in need, to fighting deadly diseases such as measles and Ebola, from reuniting separated children with their families, to ensuring people uprooted by natural disasters and conflict have shelter, access to clean water, health care, food, and nutrition. Women humanitarians are even better able to access women and girls who might otherwise be out of reach, to bring them the services, vital information, and support which they need. And women strengthen humanitarian response by bringing different perspectives, insights, and experiences. An effective humanitarian response is an inclusive one. And women must play a central role in humanitarian decision-making, program design, and implementation. This World Humanitarian Day, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, has launched a campaign showcasing 24 compelling stories of 24 women over a cycle of 24 hours to show the breadth and the diversity of women's contributions to humanitarian action. There's countless other stories that could have been told, so we have chosen 24 of very remarkable women in many different contexts. And each of the 24 hours uses the routines of our everyday lives to show the contrasting daily experiences of women humanitarians who are working in some of the world's most challenging, difficult, dangerous environments. The campaign with the hashtag Women Humanitarians reminds us of just how different a morning routine, a meeting at work, or a commute home looks for women on the ground helping to deliver aid. For instance, for Barbara, she's the only female driver working for WFP in Central African Republic, so breaking a stereotype. The only female driver among a convoy of 15 cars to deliver supplies across conflict zones in the Central African Republic. For Wanda at Plan International in Indonesia, the first thing on her daily to-do list is to meet with displaced families and find out if they are receiving the right help. And for Maya in Lebanon, dinner time for her means distributing free meals to hundreds of Syrian refugee families. Today, on World Humanitarian Day, we invite everyone to join this campaign and share the stories of impressive women who are helping to further humanity. Actually, ahead of World Humanitarian Day, we had a survey among 1,000 women humanitarians in 115 countries and asked them what motivates them. And they said they want to contribute to humanity and further social justice. So having this campaign is our shared way of honoring their work and the work of all humanitarians who together are helping to save and improve the lives of millions of women, men, and children most in need. And all of these examples and many more show the impact of women humanitarians who, despite ongoing risk and insecurity in many places, stand their ground to save and improve people's lives. Women humanitarians can also help to make response efforts more effective and strengthen gender equality in crisis settings. And this is why we need women in the humanitarian sector, and we need them at all levels, from the front lines of the response to the top leadership levels. And today, on Humanitarian World Day, we invite everyone to join this campaign and honor their work, and that of all humanitarians. Thank you very much. Happy to take your questions.
Edie?
Thank you very much, Ms. Mueller. On behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association, welcome and thank you for doing this briefing on World Humanitarian Day. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. You said that respect for the rules of war is weakening. Why is this so? Is it the growth of armed groups, extremist groups, and what can the United Nations do to try and reverse this and ensure greater respect?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much indeed for your question, which shows again that humanitarian work is getting more dangerous due to the erosion of respect for international law, international humanitarian law, international human rights law. Member states and the Security Council are the ones to also uphold their obligations, which they signed up to, and to condemn any violation of international humanitarian law. Medical facilities, humanitarian workers are not a target. They are protected under international humanitarian law. And this cannot go uncondemned. Wherever we see attacks on humanitarians and also attacks on civilians in general, but particularly for humanitarian workers and health workers, we have to stand up and condemn the disrespect and non-acceptance of violating international humanitarian law.
Aside from getting member states and perhaps the Security Council to condemn these, is there anything else that the United Nations should be doing to try and reverse this and ensure that the rules of law are followed?
The license to operate for humanitarians is that humanitarian work is based on humanitarian principles, which are neutrality, impartiality, independence, and needs-based, serving the people in need. And humanitarian assistance should not be politicized. To face the increased risks and insecurities of humanitarian aid workers, we have risk mitigation mechanisms in place, and it's absolutely crucial to abide by these principles of neutrality and to advocate that humanitarian assistance is based on these humanitarian principles which are universally recognized.
Thank you very much, ESG Mueller. My name is Ahmed Fadi for American Television News. Under the current Secretary General Guterres, really quite a landmark achievements have happened with regard to gender parity throughout the organizations. You say that the humanitarian worker makes 40% out, and you're looking for more involvement by female humanitarian worker in shaping the delivery of humanitarian aid. Can you give me examples to how more involved you wish to see the women humanitarian workers, and in what areas specifically? My second part of the questions, there was earlier reports about investigation took place in Yemen, WHO office there, and there were some irregularities with regard to hiring, aid funds for aid that was missing, etc. Throughout the aid system in the United Nations, the humanitarian aid system in the United Nations, do you agree that it's time to undertake a complete and comprehensive audit of all the missions that they are on the ground? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fadi, for your two questions. Gender parity is a first step. We need to get to gender equality, and we need to have more women also in leadership positions. If you look across the humanitarian sector, you look at international NGOs, you still find a lot of men in leadership positions. So women need to be included from the needs assessment to the programming cycle to the delivery, but also the decision making. In some of the countries I visit, where we have humanitarian country teams, I still see that the women are tasked to take the notes of a meeting, while they are empowered and professional enough to also make decisions. So this is a cultural change that is needed also in the humanitarian sector. On the United Nations has a zero tolerance for corruption. We depend on voluntary contributions from member states, from individuals to contribute to humanitarian response. For instance, OCHA manages the Secretary General's Central Emergency Response Fund, which is more than 500 million per year. We manage 18 country-based pooled funds, depending on where a member state wants to contribute to the humanitarian response, from Mali to Ukraine, from Syria. So any taint of corruption or fraud is disastrous. So we have fraud prevention mechanisms in place, and when we hear about irregularities, we make every effort to follow up and correct it.
Celia? The shoes. Go ahead.
Thank you. What are the challenges that the aid humanitarian workers are facing in crisis as recent as the Venezuelan migration crisis on areas like Brazil and Colombia, Ecuador? We know that recently some of the residents of Pacaraima, which is the border between Brazil and Venezuela, have protested the presence of members of the United Nations refugee groups that are working there, assisting. So what is the challenges, and especially you highlight the dangers that many of them put themselves to try to help many of these people?
Well, you mentioned the crisis of the outflow of Venezuelans into neighboring countries, and we must applaud the incredible generosity of countries like Colombia, Brazil, Chile, even Peru, of hosting the people that make it into their countries. The United Nations and partners finalized the humanitarian response plan for Venezuela to assist inside Venezuela, which was launched August 14th, which requires appeals for $223 million to provide humanitarian assistance to 2.6 million people, Venezuelans, children, women, the most people that are most in need, especially the elderly, until the end of the year. This is just the estimate for the end of the year. So the plan aims to cover the most pressing humanitarian needs across the entire country with a focus on 10 priority states. And there's a particular focus on the western and the southern border regions and the capital district. We have developed this humanitarian response plan. It was developed in country by the humanitarian country team in consultation with the government, with the various line ministries, and also with other partners, including the Humanitarian Committee of the National Assembly.
Majid, and then we'll go to the back.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Ursula. My name is Majid Gili from Rodeo Media Network. I have two questions. The first one is about Iraq, where the UN is running one of the most complicated and largest humanitarian program. It's been 2 years since the all major operation against ISIS has been finished in Iraq. And those areas that has been liberated from ISIS are areas that their original population are largely not there, still has not been able to return from the neighboring countries, from the other parts of Iraq. Do you know what's the main cause that hindering the return of hundreds of thousands of Iraqi refugees to their former territories? It's been 2 years since the war stopped in those areas. And the second question is about Syria. On August 9, the Wall Street Journal reported that Turkey is taking steps to relocate 700,000 Syrian refugees to territories it hopes to seize back from U.S.-backed Kurdish groups in Syria. This is a large operation to relocate 700,000 refugees. Are you aware of these steps and plans by Turkey? And will the United Nations cooperate to implement this plan? Thank you.
Well, thank you for very complex questions on two very complex situations, Iraq and Syria. The government of Iraq is in charge. And they are addressing the question of returns to which areas, where from, what are the opportunities, is it a voluntary return? So I believe this is a big challenge for the government of Iraq, which they are facing right now and which they are addressing. On Syria, as you might be aware that the Security Council is being briefed every week on the situation in Syria. There is never a humanitarian solution to this complex political issue, even if you move people around. The United Nations is a neutral when it comes to humanitarian assistance. So we have our needs assessment, which is known. Where do we have access to Rukban, to what's happening in Idlib? So we are aware of the humanitarian situation. It's not easy to validate all the information. The information needs to be triangulated. It has to be assessed. And we have, I think, 15,000 UN staff, a lot of local humanitarians on the ground who deliver humanitarian assistance and protection to the people in need. And we know that there is a movement now, even out of Idlib, of people towards the border with Turkey. So it's a very dynamic environment.
Just on those weekly reports that you rightly, almost weekly reports read by Mr. Lockock about the situation in Syria, there's little about what's going on in North northeast. And this plan that I mentioned, that the relocation of 700,000 refugees, is to relocate them to northeast of Syria. You didn't answer my question. Are you aware of this plan by Turkey? Is there any coordination between UN and Turkey to implement it?
I cannot answer this question.
Yes, in the back.
Thank you, Ms. Mueller. My name is George Tichy with Ukrainian news agency Ukrinform. We know in Ukraine in particular how important are efforts by UN humanitarians. This year there was a country-based national pooled fund that was established. So I just wanted to ask you to provide maybe some more details into how this fund has been filled for now, and is it, so to say, enough at the moment to provide the humanitarian aid needed? Thank you.
Thank you for this question. It is number 18 of the country-based pooled funds which we manage, which we set up recently. And there was a big interest, particularly from European member states, to contribute to this fund. It is managed by the humanitarian coordinator. Actually, today on World Humanitarian Day, she also uses to highlight the situation in eastern Ukraine, and we make the needs known of the people in eastern Ukraine, and hope that this fund, because we establish a fund and run it, you need to have a certain threshold of resources.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Alejandro Rincon with NTN24 News from Latin America, and I have a follow-up on the emergency response plan for Venezuela. I wonder if you have a message to governments or institutions in the region as to what can they do to support the overall task and be able to fulfill the goals set up by the plea. And if this plea doesn't happen by the end, if we don't find the 223 million that are required, what's the risk? How this humanitarian response could be affected if the goal is not being fulfilled? Thank you.
As the global needs are always more higher than the resources, your question is spot on. What cannot be achieved if the funding is not forthcoming? The initial needs assessment for Venezuela calculated it's 7 million people in need of assistance. And you did not ask why only 2.6 million, because I tried to explain it's really prioritized, focusing on the most vulnerable, the elderly, the health sector, food sector. We don't know how generous the international donor community will be. But we see the impact of this economic and political crisis. That's why we humanitarians hope that there's efforts underway, and we know there's efforts underway to find a solution, that people don't have to leave their country and they can make ends meet within Venezuela.
Okay, we'll just take two more questions. Go ahead, James.
Thank you so much. You were asked a question before about the investigation into abuses and corruption in Yemen, and you gave a very straight, clear answer: zero tolerance, everything is investigated. But the allegations in Yemen relate to, for example, a 20-year-old who was able to hire a student for a high-paying UN job, and that job was to look after his dog. You could look at another situation, another investigation that's happening at the moment in the UN Relief Works Agency in Palestine, and there the head of the agency, the allegation is that he gave a high-paying job to his girlfriend. For sure, there's zero tolerance for this kind of behavior, and things will be investigated. But do these two cases not indicate that perhaps it's just a little bit too easy to bend the rules for these people who are operating in the field, too easy for them to behave badly in the first place? And at your level, are you looking at these situations and thinking that perhaps you need to have a review and tighten your policies?
Policies are only as good as they are implemented. And if a moral compass is not right, we need to really look at the people that are committing these very devastating activities for the humanitarian response. Of course, the examples you mentioned are in complex situations, and when we are made aware of these irregularities or corruption or fraud, we follow up, and I think there is mechanisms and rules in place to do so. And also, these people need to face consequences, that it's not just brushed aside and can go unpunished. That's maybe not the right word.
Yep. Last question.
Hi, I'm Elena from the Portuguese news agency. I wanted to ask you if you think that the humanitarian aid has developed in a sense that has become stronger and faster than ever before in response to emergencies. And I'd like to look back to the example of Mozambique, Malawi, and Zimbabwe. After the natural disaster, it has been now 5 months ago. Do you think that the humanitarian aid that was done to that countries has become was better planned or faster than other disasters before?
Actually, I believe that the humanitarian architecture and the response is effective. It can always be better. But to look at this particular example, it was a woman who was managing the disaster response in Mozambique. Her name is Augusta Maita. I met her. And when she shared her story that she saw women and children being swept away by floods right there in this action, I was very moved. But I also saw how important it is that after a natural disaster, the local capacity is in place because these countries are in charge, and the international community comes in to support their locally led efforts. So absolutely, the Mozambique response to Cyclone Idai and later on Kenneth, within a short time, 6 weeks, they were hit by 2 cyclones, was very impressive. The coordination in the field, so the government said, well, this is the airport, you can set up the UN agencies, and OCHA doing the coordination there was an enormous success. And also the funding was forthcoming by the international donor community. So, but key is really the local capacity and empowerment of the local responders. So you'll have this example also on the 24 stories, which we highlight today on World Humanitarian Day.
Great. Ursula, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks.